My name is Brandon, and I was never a person who believed in these things. I grew up in New York, but when I was 15, my family moved to a new house in Dallas, Texas. My dad got a better job and went first, leaving my mum, my younger sister Lauren, and me behind until everything was done. The house was brand new, newly built on a lot that had never been inhabited before. My parents were always very practical and liked rational explanations for everything. But this house changed everything. My first night there was supposed to be quiet. I arrived with my father. We helped organize some boxes, and before going to sleep, he complained of a strong pain in his chest. We rushed to the hospital thinking it was a heart attack. He did tests, but they found nothing. We returned home, and he became strange, as if he was always tired and distracted. The next day, my mother and sister arrived, and we began to live our new life. But already in the first few days, some things began to make us restless. My parents complained about noises on the walls, as if something was rubbing inside them. At first, we thought it could be pipes or even rats, but the sounds were too loud, as if something was scratching the wood. In addition, my father began to hear voices when he slept. He said that one night, he woke up to a whisper at the foot of his bed. When she opened her eyes, she heard a shh, and everything fell silent. He swore it wasn't a dream, but my mother tried to calm him down, saying it was just the stress of moving. Things took a turn for the worse when Lauren started crying in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. My parents used a baby monitor to listen to her from the next room. And one night my mother heard something that made her freeze. It wasn't just my sisters crying, but a knocking sound as if someone was touching her. My parents ran to her room, but the door wouldn't open. My father had to force with his shoulder until the lock gave way. When they entered, she was sitting in the crib sobbing, and her cheeks had red markings. After that, my mother became obsessed with protecting Lauren. We took everything that could be dangerous from her room, but things didn't stop. One night, my older brother Ethan came to spend a weekend with us. He slept in the guest room, which was at the end of the hall. In the middle of the night, he rushed into my room, pale and shaking. He said he woke up to the noise of his closet opening by itself. When she looked inside, she saw an old mirror that my mother kept there. In the reflection, he saw not only himself, but something he did not want to describe. Ethan didn't want to tell him exactly what he saw in the mirror, but said it was enough for him to leave the room right away. My father tried to calm him down, saying that it must have been a nightmare, but he insisted that he was awake. After that night, he refused to sleep in that room again. The next day, we took the mirror and threw it away. But even without it, the guest room still had a strange atmosphere. I avoided going there at night, and it seemed that the door never closed properly, always leaving a dark crack in the hallway. It didn't take long for me to start having strange experiences too. One night, I woke up to a noise on my radio. It had a rotary volume knob, and the display light flashed dimly in the dark. The strange thing is that it was turned off. I went over and turned the knob to see if it stopped. At first it seemed normal, but when I lay down again, the sound came back, slowly increasing, as if someone was moving it. I got up, turned it off completely, and went back to sleep. This was repeated several times during the week, and I started sleeping with the radio unplugged. In addition to the radio, I started to lose things inside my own room. I left something on the dresser at night, and in the morning I was on the other side of the room. At first I thought it was my distraction, but one night I left my cell phone charging on the desk and woke up with it under the bed. No one from my family came into my room, so I couldn't understand how it happened. Each day the feeling that something was watching us grew stronger. Even during the day there were times when the air felt heavy, as if someone was standing right behind me. The worst came when I started having nightmares. In dreams, I was in the house, but everything seemed wrong. The lights didn't turn on, the doors were unlocked but fastened, as if an invisible force prevented me from leaving. I tried to call my parents, but no one answered. In the dark corners, I felt something watching me. I woke up in a cold sweat and didn't have the courage to get out of bed to drink water. The strange thing was to discover that my brother was also having these dreams, always with the same feeling of being trapped inside the house, alone. One night, while folding towels in the hallway closet, I heard hurried footsteps on the stairs. I looked up and saw a shadow run past in the direction of the guest room. The door slammed. In fright, I called for Ethan, but remembered that he was no longer living with us. I opened the door and, as expected, the room was empty. I went downstairs trembling and found my father in the kitchen. He looked at me confused and said that he had also heard the footsteps. We both sat silent, not knowing what to do. After this episode, my father finally admitted that something was wrong in the house. He always tried to find logical explanations for everything, but after that night he kept quiet and just said that we should avoid being alone in the rooms for too long. My mother, on the other hand, was already convinced that the house had something bad about it. She started leaving the hallway light on at night and scattered some religious objects around the house, especially in my sister's room where things seemed worse. It was during this period that my sister began to act strange. She was little at the time and slept with a baby monitor, so my parents could hear if she cried at night. At first, it was just weird noises like cracks and faint whispers coming from the device, but over time, things got worse. One night, my parents clearly heard the sound of slaps followed by crying. They ran to her room and tried to open the door, but something seemed to be blocking. My father had to pick the lock, and when they finally managed to get in, they found my sister curled up in bed with red marks on her face. My mother was desperate, but my sister just cried, unable to explain what had happened. She was too young to come up with something like that, and my father, who was still trying to cling to logic, couldn't find any plausible explanation. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room staring blankly into the hallway as if waiting for something to appear. After this event, we tried to ignore what happened and go on with life normally, but no one slept peacefully in that house anymore. Small events kept happening, such as doors that seemed to open on their own and objects disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. But the worst were dreams. I had continued to dream of the house, but now I felt that I was not alone inside it. In the darkest corners of the rooms, he saw shadows that should not be there. Something was watching me in my own dream, waiting for me to get closer. On one of the scariest nights, I woke up to a noise of shuffling footsteps in the hallway. My room was at the end of the hallway, and the door was ajar. The sound was slowly approaching until it stopped right in front of my room. My heart raced. I stood still in bed, holding my breath. The silence was interrupted by the sound of something scratching at the door. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, but when I finally got up the courage to look, the door was wide open. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I got up and went to the door. The corridor seemed empty, but there was something wrong. The lamplight in my sister's room was on, but it flashed as if it had bad contact. The worst thing was that her room was at the opposite end of the hallway, and my parents always put her to sleep with the door closed. The door was wide open now, and I could have sworn I had seen a shadow enter her room. My body acted before I could think. On impulse, I ran down the hallway, not caring about the fear, or the feeling that something was watching me closely. When I arrived at the door of my sister's room, everything was normal. She slept soundly, the light of the lamp shone steadily, and there was no sign of anyone else there. My heart was still pounding when I returned to my room, but before I closed the door, I heard a crack behind me. The lamp flashed one last time before going out on its own. After that, I decided to tell my mother. The next day, while she was preparing breakfast, I tried to explain what I had seen. I waited for her to tell me it was just a nightmare, or that my imagination was playing tricks on me, but instead she turned pale. "You're not the first to see that shadow," she said without looking at me. I asked who else had seen it, and she hesitated before answering. "Your father. He doesn't talk about it, but he has woken up several times in the middle of the night thinking that there was someone standing in the room near the door. And I also saw once." The fact that my mother admitted this made me even more scared. I knew she tried her best to pretend that everything was fine, that none of it was real. But hearing her confess that she had seen something too made me realize that I could no longer ignore it. I asked why we didn't leave the house, but the answer was obvious. We had nowhere to go. My parents had spent all their savings on the move, and selling the house so fast was not an option. Over the next few days, I began to notice that my father avoided being alone at night. He always stayed in the living room until the last member of the family went to sleep, and when he finally went to the bedroom, he left the hallway light on. He never admitted to being afraid, but his actions spoke for themselves. My mother started sleeping with a rosary under her pillow, and my sister, who had previously slept alone in the crib, could now only fall asleep if someone stayed in the room with her. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but the feeling that something was watching us never went away. Even during the day, the house felt heavy, suffocating. I began to notice small details, doors that were ajar when we were sure they were closed, objects that disappeared and reappeared in strange places, and that strange sound of something scraping the walls at night. One night, while trying to sleep, I heard my bedroom radio turn on by itself. The volume started low but slowly increased. I sat up on the bed, feeling my heart race. The light on the display glowed in the darkness, and the volume knobs turned on their own, as if someone was fiddling with them. I jumped out of bed and tried to turn it off, but the power button didn't work. Only when I pulled the cord from the outlet did it finally fall silent. The next morning, I told my mom, but she just sighed and told me to ignore it. The more attention we give, the worse it gets, she said. But how can you ignore something like this? I knew it wasn't my imagination. Something in that house liked to test us, to provoke us, and I didn't know how far that could go. My father, on the other hand, began to act strangely. Always skeptical, he refused to admit that anything was going on. But one evening, I saw him, sitting in the living room with the Bible open, reading in a low voice. When he realized I was there, he quickly closed the book and sent me to the bedroom. It was the first time I realized that, as much as he denied it, he was as scared as we were. It was when my sister started crying in the middle of the night that things got worse. It wasn't a normal cry. It was as if she was scared, desperate. My parents would run to her room, but the door just wouldn't open. No matter how hard they tried to turn the handle or push it, something seemed to stop it from moving. On the other side, my sister screamed louder and louder until, suddenly, everything fell silent. When my father finally managed to break down the door, we found my sister huddled in the corner of the room, sobbing. His face was red, as if he had been slapped on both sides. My parents held her and tried to calm her down, but she only pointed her finger to the corner of the room between sobs. But there was no one there. That was the first time my father openly showed fear. He took my sister on his lap and took her to sleep with them. For the rest of the night, we all stayed awake, waiting for something else to happen. But the house remained in absolute silence, a silence that was almost worse than any strange noise. The next day, my father made a drastic decision. He brought a glass of white vinegar and began to say prayers in Spanish, walking through each room of the house. I didn't understand everything he said, but I could see the tension in his voice. He put a glass of vinegar in each room of the house, saying that it would help pull any bad energy. After that, the house became quieter, at least for a while. But there was still something there. The dreams continued. The sounds on the walls didn't completely disappear, and the radio still turned on by itself from time to time, as if the thing was waiting for a new opportunity to show itself. I began to wonder if the problem was in the house or in us. Did we take something with us when we moved? Did the sofa we picked up on the street bring something with it? Or was there simply something in that land that did not want us to live there? The next few months were unusually quiet, but I could never fully relax. I still felt that presence, that feeling of being watched. Radio turning on by itself became less frequent, but it still happened. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night feeling a weight in my chest, as if something was sitting on me. One day, out of curiosity, I took the glass of vinegar that my father had left under my bed. The liquid had solidified into a dark, weird mass that made me uneasy. I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was just a chemical phenomenon, a coincidence, but part of me knew there was something more. After what my father did, the presence in that house seemed less aggressive, but it was still there, lurking. My mother, however, refused to talk about it. Whenever someone mentioned the strange happenings, she would change the subject or simply get up and leave the room. My brother also didn't like to talk about it, and my sister, still very young, said she didn't remember anything, but I remembered. I remembered the noises, the whispers, the radio turning on by itself, and what happened to my sister that night. And even though the activity had decreased, something told me that it was never really over. When I went to college, I spent some time away from that house, and for a while, I thought that all that would be in the past. But whenever I returned to visit my family, that feeling hit me again as soon as I walked through the door. The silence of the house seemed heavier, as if she still kept something she didn't want to be forgotten. Once, while I was home for a holiday, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling inexplicably cold. The radio, which I no longer used, was turned on at the lowest possible volume, emitting only a static hiss. I knew I had unplugged it before going to sleep. I got up, unplugged again, and sat on the bed, trying to calm my breathing. The next day I mentioned what had happened to my mother, hoping that she, for the first time, would admit that something strange was happening there. But she just gave me a stern look and said, "You'd better not talk about it." That bothered me. Why did she refuse to acknowledge what we had experienced? After that day, I realized that my mother was no longer in the house alone for long either. I always found a way to go out, visit someone, or just do some time-consuming shopping. When I asked her if she felt anything strange, she just looked away and changed the subject, as she always did. The events diminished over time, but they never completely disappeared. Today, looking back, I know that something inhabited that house from the beginning. Maybe something linked to the terrain. Maybe something we brought unintentionally. I'll never know for sure. But if there's anything I've learned from this experience, it's that it doesn't matter how new a home is. Some presences just won't go away. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.